sweep! Stop the sweep!
Stop the sweep!
Stop the sweep!
Stop the sweep! Stop the sweep! Stop the sweep! Stop the sweep! Stop the sweep! Stop the sweep! Stop the sweep! Stop the
$4 million to sweep
Grapefruit.
Forest Street and Harvey West was set up well during that one problem with health problems. There was the 4 portable toilets, a dumpster, and hand wash. That was optional. That lasted only 2 weeks, and it stayed there for years while there was really some effort. But I don't see them the people in power see the homeless as humans. That's the bottom line problem. They're like rodents to be managed. And all the policies of the city and the housing, they're all about managing pests. And the people that live on the streets, that's the way they perceive it. So this is real. Yeah, but you don't spend all day with homeless people outside all day. And you don't feed homeless people outside all day, and you don't see the desperation of these people all day. So your perception is inaccurate, I would just say. Okay? Yeah, fair enough. Yeah. And it's frightening because both the Supreme Court ruling and then the nuisance order and the criminalization that is happening, it is an utter nightmare, ruining people's lives even more by the actual policies that are happening that you'll be praising tonight to the public. And we'll be giving this whole impression that's different from the reality of the people on the street. It's frightening. It's very similar to, I would imagine, the people like Katie Colwitz when National Socialism was coming about, they might have felt the same. Yep, we have fascism, no matter what we do. Whoever we elect, fascism, old fashioned, police state, world war. So the thing is that you're going to have, the amount of homeless people is going to double, triple with a failing economy and a war, the gas prices going to $10 a gallon, and all that. And then you don't have a plan right now to take in another 3,000 homeless people that have to safely live somewhere. And Don remembers when I spoke in front of the city council in 1988, we should start building single occupancy hotels now, and we should be projecting there's going to be more homeless all the time. Because when I started, there was no homeless people, and now look at what we got. So that's the thing. So you want me to talk first? So welcome everybody. I'm with Food Not Bombs, and I have some flyers if anybody wants them. So you can come to the downtown, to the clock tower and meet with us and meet homeless people and find out how brutal the policies of these people are in real life and real person. It's really important to do that. This is the most desperate, horrific period in the homeless community's entire history. Because the sweeps and taking away everybody's belongings and throwing them away, it's a nightmare. And we're running out of tents and things. So I just want you to start this conversation from that perspective, because that's the perspective of the homeless. It's completely different than what you're going to hear here. Because this is a vicious war against homeless people, and these are the people that are locally waging that war. So that's you want a flyer? I'm sorry, David. Beautiful. Okay, anybody want a flyer now? Bless everybody for coming, and come down to the clock tower and help us feed the hungry. We were the only meals in Santa Cruz for 3 years, and the city harassed us the whole 3 years, but we never missed one day of feeding people during the pandemic. Not one day. So we're there with the people living on the streets. Yeah. And we know what the suffering's like. Thank you very much, you guys. Cool.
That was not part of our program. We'll start our program in just a minute. Thank you.
The tragedy of what is going on in our city could not be more heartbreaking. The suffering that is happening because of these policies is just relentless. And I urge people to come down to the clock tower and meet the people, and they're happy, dignified, trying to struggle people, but they're losing their belongings every day, and it's just frightening what is happening. You know, people ask me, I would go through about $400 a week on pup tents and sleeping bags to replace what the city takes every day. And just to talk to a person that slept 3 days in the cold without a blanket because of this policies that they're going to tell you about, it is heartbreaking. And I want you to know that is the reality that you will not be hearing this evening, but it is the reality, and it should touch your heart, and we should demand these people stop doing this torture of the people on the streets. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. We're going to start our program now.
Okay, start the program. Woohoo!
Hi, everybody. Thanks so much for coming tonight. We appreciate each and every one of you being here and sharing your perspective. We do have an agenda that we're going to follow tonight. This space is for education. That's what libraries are for. Our partnership with the library is all around education, and that's what this space is for. We have a planned panel questions, so and I'll introduce our panel in just a minute, but we'll go through our panel questions, and then there will be time for question and answer at the end. So Marlena is passing out some cards, and also there's some at the back. So if you could write down your question and just hold it until the end, and then we'll be going through the questions. So this is our agenda. We're going to do some welcome and introductions. Then we have meetup agreements. If you haven't been to one of our Neighbors for Neighbors meetups before, we've established some community guidelines to help keep this space safe for everyone. And to create a community where everyone's voice is heard. So these are our community agreements. I'm going to read through them. To ensure a safe space for learning together. Please take care of yourself. If you need to use the bathroom, there's a door back here. You can go out that door, and there's a bathroom and some drinking fountain to the left when you go out the door. Feel free to do that whenever during the meeting. We use inclusive language that affirms diversity and celebrates the dignity of all people, including people of color, people of all gender and sexual identities, people of varying abilities, and people of all ages. So please choose your words wisely to use inclusive language when you have a chance to speak. Take space and make space. So this is really thinking about how much you're talking. We actually, for this session, because it's so full, we're limiting the Q&A to 1 minute. So you'll have a minute, and that's your platform. You can either make a statement, if you have a statement to make, or you can ask a question of the panel. Marlena will be queuing people for that Q&A session, and you'll have 1 minute. We do have a timer this time, so there we go. A noise like that will happen when your minute is up, so please be aware of that and mindful about how you're speaking. Also, listen respectfully and assume positive intent wherever possible, noting that this room is full of people with different ideas, different experiences, different perspectives, and we all bring that here. So really being aware of that and listening with that in mind. There are no bad questions. There are no stupid questions. So if you ask a question, feel free. This is a space to learn. So take the learnings, lead the stories. So sometimes people on the panel or people in the audience might share something personal and they're telling a story. So if you could leave the personal part out and just take away whatever learning there is from that story to share with other people outside the meeting, that would be helpful. Is there anybody here who feels like they could not keep these agreements? Raise your hand. Everybody's agreeing. Fantastic. So we'll refer back to these. This will come back on the screen in just a minute. So this will be a reminder, and we'll refer back to these throughout the meeting. So I'm going to just do a quick introduction. We'll come back to the panel to they'll each give a bio of themselves briefly and what they do, but just to introduce them briefly, we'll start on the end with Collin Webb. Collin is our Housing Matters, Housing Now, Housing Stabilization Specialist. Thanks for being here, Collin. And next to Collin is Heather Rogers, who is Santa Cruz County's first public defender. Thank you for being here. We appreciate you. Larry Imwalle is the City of Santa Cruz Homelessness Response Manager. Thanks for being here. Larry's been here many times. We appreciate you. Mayor Keeley. That says it all. Mayor of the City of Santa Cruz. And Don Lane, who's Vice President of the Housing Matters Board, also been mayor how many times? 3 times. And lots of other community organizing. So, and we'll come back for a little bit more in just a minute.
Don't admit to that.
So I wanted to also introduce myself. I didn't do that yet. My name is Mare Stafford. I'm the Chief Impact Officer for Housing Matters. We started this program in partnership with the library as an educational opportunity for the community to really provide a platform for conversation. And we really rejoice and are so happy to have differing opinions. We really want to provide this space for people to speak and for us all to learn from one another. So, over here, Marlena DeCastro is our Community Education Specialist. Tonight, Marlena is going to be, I think I mentioned before, managing the queue for the Q&A. So please write down your questions, and Marlena's going to take care of calling on people when we get to that section of the program. And then Marcia Greenspan. Marcia, where are you? Marcia's in the back there. So Marcia is our volunteer program manager. She's going to be doing some timekeeping for us. So she'll be timekeeping the Q&A and also me a little bit. Make sure we stay on track. Yeah, so that's introductions briefly. Housing Matters is a 501c3. You may have seen our campus, which is at the corner of Route 9 and Highway 1. Excuse me. We have about a 2-acre campus. We have 3 emergency shelters. And then we offer supportive services throughout the county as well, serving people who are experiencing homelessness. One of our secret sauce that we talk about is supportive housing. So we opened up our first supportive housing building, Casa Azul, in last year, and it's right there on the corner next to our campus. And there's 7 units there, and we're just about to break ground on 120 units of supportive housing for people who have been experiencing chronic homelessness. So that is starting construction right this very moment, and we're going to be having a groundbreaking on September 17th. So that'll be a time to celebrate. Let's see. So tonight, I've got just a couple of things. Usually we don't, Housing Matters and the facilitate, we're really doing facilitation. Tonight, I felt like I really wanted to give just a little bit of groundwork, lay some groundwork, so that you can understand the conversation depending on your level of education around the issue of homelessness and solutions to it. So tonight we're talking about the criminalization of homelessness, and on our slide, you can see there's some points here as we defined the criminalization of homelessness to make sleeping in public spaces a punishable crime even when there is no space available in a sanctioned shelter. So that's kind of the context of the conversation and the definition. In addition to that, I really wanted to highlight a concept we talk about, which is tokenization. And so it really, we want to acknowledge that. So we have panelists here, we have members of the community, and everybody has a different perspective. And really realizing that we can't represent every voice. You know, Mayor Keeley isn't representing every mayor in the country. Mayor Keeley is representing the city of Santa Cruz and Mayor Keeley, for example, rather than, so really keeping that in mind. So we ask you to think about that, the people on the panel and anybody who's talking, that they're just one person representing themselves, not representing a whole group, because that's nearly impossible. Another thing is complexity. So encampments, which is part of this conversation around criminalization, are very complex. Our human experience is varied, and while we're eager to label things good or bad, we try to set that aside for a moment. And because we all see these things from different perspectives. So just acknowledging the complexity of what we're talking about tonight. It's not an easy thing. And I think we all have a lot of feelings around this issue, criminalization, encampments, people experiencing homelessness. I can feel the energy in the room, and just acknowledging that, that it is very complex. One of the things, or a big piece of what we're talking about tonight is policy. So we're really talking about policy and systems. We're not talking about people, as in people who represent organizations or organizations themselves. We're really talking about policy and systems. So thinking about it in the bigger view, rather than individuals, and blaming or criticizing, I guess, or even praising, but thinking about it in terms of the system. So, and the last thing I just want to point out is, so it's a huge puzzle, all of this, complex, so many different perspectives, and the topic, criminalization of homelessness, is just one piece of a really multi-dimensional community. And it's just part of the social systems that may or may not be working. We're going to kind of dive into that a little bit tonight. And while that is a difficult thing to grapple with, I really want to highlight and point out that there are also a massive amount of people who are doing really incredible work in our community. Like, this is so complex, and yet there are these really amazing, big-hearted people who are doing a lot of work, many of whom are in this room right now. There's other organizations, Abode, People First, Wings, Homeless Advocacy. We have some activists in the room who do a lot of really amazing work in the community, passing out tents and doing all kinds of really great work. And we, Housing Matters, applaud all of the work that's being done, even if it doesn't quite align with our view or your view. Like, we're just acknowledging that there's a lot of really great work being done. So I want to say that. And then I'm going to kind of be quiet and start asking some questions of this amazing panel. So we're going to start with, if you could please introduce yourself, your name, your preferred pronouns, and your role in your organization. Collin, do you mind starting?
Yeah. I thought this was the end.
You are number one, so it makes sense.
All right. Collin, Webb, he, him pronouns. I'm the housing stabilization specialist. Do I share more?
Yeah, could you talk about your role a little bit
Oh,
at
yes.
Housing Matters?
Yes. As a housing stabilization specialist, I work with folks who have experienced chronic homelessness, so that's a year or more. So the case managers support them in finding the housing, helping support them in securing the housing, and then once that is done, then I come in the picture and I help them with maintaining the housing, and that's with helping support them with meaningful goals, helping them build community, helping them connect with various community resources like Mayor shared earlier, like all those community partners, connecting with them, helping them address maybe certain needs of like their health, connecting with if they want to build certain employable skills, if they want to find employment, if they want to just overall anything that works towards their success in housing and just being successful members of our community, of course. So that is my role.
Appreciate you. Heather?
Thank you so much. So I'm going to stand up so I can see all of you. And also, I spend my days in court where we do this. We spend I feel like I'm picking a jury. You're all on a jury. So I'm Heather Rogers. I'm the public defender of Santa Cruz County, and we defend everybody in this county who is charged with a crime or facing involuntary commitment and cannot afford to defend themselves. We have a team of between 70 and 80 defenders, depending really on how many volunteers we have. And together we work on interdisciplinary holistic teams to work with each client to reach not just their legal goals, but also their social goals. I have to introduce my Chief Deputy, Athena Rees, who wanted to sit in the back and not be so she runs our legal division, which is really the engine of this amazing model that we're employing in Santa Cruz County, where we sit down with each individual client and we find out what brought you to the criminal legal system and what can we do as attorneys, investigators, social workers, and advocates to help you lift yourself out of it. So a lot of what we do is we screen for housing issues, right? We sit down with folks and we say, what brought you here and what do you want for yourself? I have never represented a client who said to me, you know what, Heather? When I was a young boy or a young girl or a young person, I grew up wanting to be in a cage, right? That is not real life. My clients are complicated human beings with important life stories that we both need to tell, but we also need to partner with them to help them get to where they've always wanted to be. And so that's what we do. Housing's a huge part of it because my clients need homes. My clients don't need citations. They don't need to be incarcerated. They don't need to be whisked from place to place and have their belongings taken. They need homes. And so I'm so excited to be here tonight to first of all serve all of you as your public defender, but also to be a part of this conversation, which frankly is dear to my clients' hearts. So thank you.
Good evening, everybody. I'm Larry Imwalle. I'm the Homelessness Response Manager for the City of Santa Cruz. In that role, what I principally do is oversee the Homelessness Response Division for the city, which is a team of 5 people, 3 outreach workers, a services manager, and also we've got our comms person part-time that's associated with us, and then also another part-time analyst who really supports the financial side of the contracting. So in that role, it's really responsible for, I think, principally our outreach team that is out in the city, dealing with, engaging with, building relationships with people experiencing homelessness every single day. And then working on developing the services we have to support people that are experiencing homelessness. So thinking about shelter, expanding shelter, creating safe parking programs, and really trying to expand that capacity to meet the need of the community. And then the other piece of my role is really kind of being that point person and trying to coordinate across city departments and how we respond to homelessness.
Keeley?
I'm not an attorney, but I'm dressed like one today, so I'll stand up. My name is Fred Keeley. I'm the first directly...
You got the attention of Siri, man.
There we go.
That was hilarious.
My name is Fred Keeley. I'm the first directly elected four-year mayor in the city of Santa Cruz. Voters changed the charter a few years ago, went from at-large elections to 6 council districts and 1 directly elected four-year mayor. And the voters were kind enough to do that. In the 80s and 90s, I was county supervisor. In the 90s and early 2000s, I was a state legislator. In the 2000 teens, I was the county treasurer. And in 2022, I was elected mayor. What's interesting to me about this group, among other things, wonderful people, I feel like I need to stand up and also speak on behalf of the county here for a moment, because the city has a limited role. Cities are not a whole general purpose government. We do a lot of things, but Health and Human Services is not 2 of those things. We don't do that. That is what our partners in county government do, and we rely on them to a great extent to do that. We mostly work, as Larry indicated, we've got some teams that work with our county partners. We do shelter work primarily, but the service provision by and large is done by our wonderful partners at the County of Santa Cruz. One little plug. The state falls in and out of love with things, whether it's in education or ocean policy or housing or anything else. And they were in love for a while with shelter, and they've fallen out of love with shelter. And now they're basically not funding that any longer. They're funding things that they call upstream prevention, and we appreciate that, good for them. But that leaves us with the question of shelter. And so the voters passed a half-cent sales tax measure last year. We're using that to supplant state money that's no longer coming in the shelter space. However, I want to give a shout out to Senator Laird, Assemblymember Pellerin, Assemblymember Addis, and the Speaker of the Assembly, who all of them got together in a year where there was a $70 billion state budget deficit. They got us a handful of $1 million to help us continue on with our shelter efforts. So if you see those folks, give them a thank you.
Dawn, please.
Hi everyone, my name is Don Lane, and as Mayor noted, I once served as mayor and city council member in the city of Santa Cruz. But my more relevant role here is that I serve on the governing board of Housing Matters, and that includes, maybe I should also say that 30 plus years ago I was part of a small group that founded the organization and have continued to work with it all through that this time. I'm a volunteer as a board member, and I also do some other volunteer work, including I have the pleasure of giving tours of Housing Matters for those of you who are interested, along with Collin and Marlena, every month or so. So I'd encourage you to do that. Participating this way is a great way to learn, but also coming to our site and really seeing some of the things that are going on there is really valuable as well. So I encourage you to do that, and I'll keep doing it too.
Awesome. We appreciate that. Dawn, would you kick us off and start with telling us a little bit about the 2018 Martin v. Boise ruling and what that was about?
Sure. And I'd really encourage Heather, if you feel like I miss anything,
Yes.
feel free to chime in too. So in 2018, some folks who were unhoused in the city of Boise worked with attorneys there, and they sued the city of Boise saying, you're penalizing us for being homeless because we don't have anywhere to go, we don't have anywhere to sleep at night, and yet Boise is giving us citations for sleeping outside in Boise. And they succeeded in a federal court lawsuit, and it was based on this idea that when someone commits an act that is unavoidable as a human being, in other words, sleeping, that in and of itself should never be punished, essentially, and that it's cruel and unusual punishment to penalize a person for sleeping when they don't have any alternative kind of sanctioned place to sleep. And so that decision led to, it went up to an appeals court, it was approved again there, and that meant that for the last 6 years, local governments in the western region of the United States were very constrained as to how they could address people sleeping outside. It didn't mean there could be no laws or ordinances enforced around this, but it was very limited. And the most important piece was that it said, if your community did not have enough safe places, legitimate places to sleep in your city, then you could not enforce a sleeping, camping ordinance there. And so that has been the rule of law for the Western United States for 6 years until, and should I continue on to what just happened, or do we want to do that separately?
We'll do it separately.
Okay, so that was how every community in the Western United States was operating. Did that sound
Heather, do you
good?
want to add anything to that?
Completely perfect. I'm just going to add, because you asked me a question, and I want to just say this, that a lot of the expert sort of contributions that went into these lawsuits pointed out what I'm sure is very clear to all of you, that sleeping is a biological necessity akin to breathing. And so when we criminalize sleeping outside or camping outside when there's nowhere else to go, we are criminalizing the very existence of human beings and their ability to exist in our spaces. And I think that's critical as we talk about policy and what we're doing now to confront these issues.
I was thinking about, like, looking back, the impact of that ruling, specifically here in the city and county of Santa Cruz. Does anybody want to speak to that, like, from 2018?
We're all looking at you.
Well, yeah, I mean, I wasn't around Santa Cruz in 2018, so, yeah, so that's a difficult question to answer
Dawn?
specifically, so.
Oh, well, I can say one
Yeah.
piece of this, which is something that is still relevant to the city council now, which is that when that ruling was the law of the land, then the city changed its ordinance, its primary ordinance around people sleeping outside to make sure it conformed to that court ruling. And so, for instance, it said that many, it basically acknowledged that people were not going to be cited if there was inadequate shelter, and also set up even some additional services, I guess, or kind of plans for services associated with the needs of people, unhoused people. So then that law is still in place. Does that sound right to you?
Well, I'm going to defer to the last part to the attorney. I mean, I think that's the question that Grant's past really kind of turned on its head about the necessity of having alternative shelters before criminalized. And how you frame my understanding of post-Martin v. Boise, how the city of Santa Cruz, at least, again, I don't know the broader Santa Cruz County, has really approached enforcement of outdoor camping on public spaces. So unless there was shelter capacity available for a person, the city would not cite and would not require something.
Maybe I should just add, it would be interesting, Heather, if you could confirm this, but in theory, in the city of Santa Cruz, since that court decision until now, the city does not give citations for sleeping in a public place. That doesn't mean there aren't other enforcements done against people who are unhoused, sleeping outside, but they are not cited for that specific activity, shall we say, or need.
I will say yes and. We can look really narrowly at the criminalization of poverty and homelessness, but I think it's a fool's errand. The truth is that what Athena and I and our teams experience in Santa Cruz is that law enforcement involvement flows from the very act of living on the streets, from the very act of not having shelter, from the status of being impoverished and what that looks like for folks. And so I'll give you an example to put a finer point on it. We recently represented a veteran who had lost his housing and was living in his car. As you know, if you have ever tried to park and sleep anywhere in our county, it often ends with a knock on the window, right? And a flashlight in your face. The officer saw what appeared to be marijuana leaves on the ground of this gentleman's car, and so used that as a reason to search, found a pipe, and now suddenly this veteran is hauled away to the county jail and booked. In the meantime, his car is took and impounded. So while the case ultimately gets resolved with a dismissal, by the time we reach that result, he's lost his car, which is effectively his home. He's lost everything in the home, which is everything he has. This exacerbates an underlying mental health disorder, which leads to a downward spiral that we're still working with him to resolve. But essentially, what looks to be nothing more than a tap on the window and a right in the face undermine the stability of this human being to the point where now he is in profound crisis. And so we can talk about the reality that we're not ticketing people for sleeping, but that really ignores the much broader reality of the bigger issue, which is the criminalization of poverty, and the reality that if we don't give people a space in which they can exist, we are going to continue to use our jail as both a shelter and a mental health facility in ways that are cruel and traumatizing to the people that we serve.
Right on.
I think if anybody wanted to share anything, research, data, about how people without access to shelter are impacted, I think that story obviously illustrates, beautifully, any other ways that people are impacted by fines, jail time, destruction of property, all the ways that we see criminalization of homelessness happening in our community. If there's any personal anecdotes, I was thinking, Collin, maybe some of your participants, you might have something to share there.
Yeah, I've had a few participants, quite a bit of participants who had encounters with law enforcement, who've been parts of different encampments and have to deal with the clearing of those encampments and how the displacement did not help them on their journey towards stability. Housed, unhoused, it just was not supportive to that. Like was mentioned, like when you get ticketed, you get fined, you go to jail, whatever, that this also impedes your ability to secure housing because you may have that on your record or you just have so many things on your plate now. What do I prioritize in this exact moment? And then also too of just losing all your belongings, losing your vitals, just all these hurdles, all these things. And again, what do I prioritize? What do I need to address in this exact moment? Yeah, it's very traumatic. At the end of the day, it's all traumatic. And then when they do come to the place of housing, it's not necessarily a smooth journey after that because you're still dealing and coping with all that past stuff that had happened. And then also that relationship with personal belongings that has been damaged, that has been challenged, I don't know how many times. So just one of the enjoyable pieces of my job is like first introduction is I go shopping with them in a sense, you know? And that is such an interesting conversation because some participants, you know, they're thrilled about it and they dive right into it and they're like, what are we gonna do? And then some people are just very, I don't wanna say minimalistic, but because they have lost so much. And I even as a person, like personally, just from my own experience, like you know, you're always waiting for that shoe to drop. You're always waiting for that shoe to drop, and that's something I had, and it took me a long time to even like unpack boxes. Because like, what's the point of setting groups? Because of just, again, having to encounter law enforcement and just all these different other barriers that comes with being unhoused, and then to get to a place of, again, stability, wherever you call that. So, yeah.
Yeah.
And I guess I would just add a little bit, I mean, really just building off the stories that were shared by Collin and Heather, that the research in the field documents and affirms exactly those kinds of stories. The criminalization doesn't work to resolve homelessness and actually creates further barriers in people making that journey back to housing and resolving their internalized trauma and all of that. So broader research confirms exactly the specific cases they talk about.
Yeah. So I'm hearing a lot about trauma, a lot about them having a bigger hurdle to once you get into housing. And Collin, you mentioned encampments, and that is kind of where I want to pivot a little bit. Larry, would you talk about what constitutes an encampment? And then on the flip side of that, give us a little view into what Encampment Resolution is all about.
Sure. So, not a real specific definition about what an encampment is in terms of how many tents, how many structures, how many people, but just more fundamentally, when we talk about encampment, it is really a collection or a congregation of makeshift living structures, tents, improvised structures, with a number of people in a sort of a very sort of consolidated area. So that may be as few as 5 tents or structures together on the sort of the corner of an open lot. It could be 800 such structures and people in a sort of consolidated area. So they look very different. There's different issues related based off of how large or small they are and the challenge that are associated in engaging folks in those environments and working towards resolving those encampments when that's the decision is made. So encampment resolution, it's a wonky word, it's jargon essentially, but it really refers to the process of closing an encampment and transitioning that space back to its natural state or original use. And that process looks very different in many different places and how that work is done. Maybe a later question, but like, for example, I mean, how we approach it in the city of Santa Cruz really is, you know, there's a couple of things when we think about encampment resolution. And first, it's not a standalone piece of how you go about the work of resolving homelessness and working to support people experiencing homelessness on their journey back into housing. So it's not a standalone, it's part of a system, or it needs to be connected to the system. And I also think it's important, there's a lot of focus on the actual day or event when an encampment is cleared. It's sort of most people's impression or assumption about what that work is. And from my perspective and the work of our team, that work begins weeks ahead of that actual day. So it really begins with our outreach team that is engaging folks in that encampment, trying to build those relationships, trust. Our team is worked citywide for years, knows a lot of these people, through their journey and experience in and out of homelessness multiple times. So sometimes they already know the people. Other times it's building that relationship. And it's starting that conversation to begin to help connect them either to shelter, other interim housing options. Or, I wish the story was better, that more people move directly from encampments to permanent housing. We have a severe permanent housing shortage, affordable housing shortage in this community that makes that journey really difficult. So for most people, that next step is into shelter. So that's a lot of work for our team to engage folks, to get them to consider shelter, to consider various shelter options. Still, it's no surprise to anybody that the number of people that are living in unsheltered situations in this county versus the number of shelter beds that we have in this county is not a one-to-one correspondence. So on any given night, we have many more people that are living on the streets in encampments than we have shelter beds available as a system. And so that work goes on for weeks most of the time, 3, 4, 5, 6 weeks, depending on the size of the encampment and the ability and success in engaging the people living in that encampment will kind of dictate how much time is involved in that process and how much success we have in getting people on that pathway. But all that work happens ahead of time. It's having conversations with them about getting them prepared for a closure that might be coming up, to think about what's your housing plan or rehousing plan. Do you have friends and family? Do you have other resources? Can we connect you to shelter? What other service needs do you have? So all that work is part of the process and lead up before the day when there's actually a closure that is happening through some kind of enforcement action.
Mayor Keeley, do you want to add anything about encampment resolution and the city's political stance, I guess, on encampments and encampment resolution?
I have a couple of thoughts about that. I think the part of this for us as a city is we live in the context of a state. And in that context, there are lots of homeless folks, and there's an uneven response to that in terms of approaches throughout the state. And in the city of Santa Cruz, I think that, and it's a debatable point, I understand this, but I think in the city of Santa Cruz, we've taken the following position, that Governor Newsom was right in his first State of the State address when he said, shelter solves your sleeping problem and permanent supportive housing solves your homeless problem. The piece he left out in there is that in between that there's a navigation center, so you move from being homeless to shelter, services are wrapped around, plan is made, that person, then move into permanent supportive housing. That's a model that we have adhered to all along, and since before I was mayor. And I think that's the right thing for us to do. I understand, as I indicated in my opening remarks, how the state can fall in love and out of love with things. I get that. We've had a North Star on this, I think, and that is there are people homeless in our city. What we know about the point in time survey is that the vast majority of the folks who are homeless in the city of Santa Cruz became homeless living in the city of Santa Cruz. And the primary reason they became homeless is they lost their job. So that large population, large portion, as I see it, we have a deep responsibility. Those are our community members. They've been here. They want to stay here. They've had some hard times trying to figure out what to do. And what we can do is work with our partners to shelter those folks, help direct them towards the county services, and then engage in those activities that will also let us build permanent supportive housing. And later on in this conversation, I won't take up all the time now, I'll talk more about what that looks like as we go forward.
Great, thank you. Is criminalization prevalent in the local encampment resolution practices that are happening now?
What do you mean by that? I want to make sure I understand your question.
Are people being ticketed in any way?
No.
Belongings taken? We talk about
Let me make sure that we answer this question. If the question is, have we criminalized homelessness in the sense that we cite people or give them tickets or in some other way criminalize them for being homeless, the answer to that is no. We haven't had one, as the public defender indicated, as others have indicated. That's not our approach. That may be some other jurisdictions, that's not our approach. We don't do
Not what we had experienced.
do you want to share?
What's difficult for me is, I'll share, I was a line public defender for 18 years before I became the public defender, and I served in this community for almost a decade, representing many of the people I'm sure that you care about. 1 in 3 adults are arrested or convicted of a crime in their lifetime. And so from that perspective, as I listen to people talk about homelessness, I'm flooded with stories and voices, the ghosts of people that I wish I could have done more for. And so I just want to say that as I listen here, I can't help but just push back a little bit on what it feels to the people who are being displaced to have an encampment resolved, right? What it feels like to them, and I'm not going to speak for everybody, what it feels like to some of the folks that I represent, what it feels like to some people is having everything that you care about ripped out of your arms and being displaced from the only community that you know. And so why does that matter to this question? Because while we are not ticketing people for being in an encampment, we are ticketing them and jailing them and sending them to prison for their response. That's right. Imagine what that would feel like to you. Picture your room, your safe place, and picture being wrenched out of it and the things that you care about being taken or destroyed, and picture how you would respond. How many of my clients respond is with trauma and distress and anger and actions that do tick the boxes of criminal activity. Trespass, resisting arrest, right? Assault of an executive officer. The list goes on and on and on and on. And so what I want to really talk about, really honestly, is that being unhoused, the state of being unhoused, is the side effect of failed social safety nets. Not failed, but absolutely successful social programming that we've had in this country for 400 years to keep folks down. And so we really need to talk about this all of a piece, because when we stigmatize the state of suffering and poverty, and when we stigmatize mental health disorders and substance use disorders and homelessness, we are just perpetuating, hundreds and hundreds of years of inequity. And so no, we are not ticketing folks who are sleeping in tents, but they end up on my caseload, and they end up being served by our teams because they are human beings who have very predictable responses to systemic oppression, right? And they have predictable responses to law enforcement. I mean, I will share, I was pulled over recently, I was exhausted, probably driving like a maniac. I was just so tired, I'd worked a 14-hour day. And when the CHP officer approached my car, my heart was beating so fast. I thought I was going to throw up, right? I'm still in my suit and heels. I am the public defender. I've had a full-on trauma response, which really put me in the shoes for a minute of the people that I serve. I had nothing to fear. I was doing nothing wrong, and yet I was flooded with adrenaline, and I felt scared and shaky and had nightmares about it. And so I just want to really be real that the folks that I represent are suffering from trauma that's been compounded by sometimes a lifetime of indignity. And
interactions with government, interactions with public defenders that harm them. And so part of what we're doing at the Office of the Public Defender is trying to always stand in a space of empathy for the individual human beings that we represent. And it's hard, but there we are.
Thank you so much. To talk about best practices. We know things, best practices around Encampment Resolution, and what it could look like without criminalization. So does anybody want to kind of pick that up a little bit, Don? I know you have some things to say about that maybe.
Yeah, and I think this is one I imagine we all could
Yes.
contribute to very much, so I'll try not to go too long, but I think it's, in the end, it's just going to be about like how one person to one person, someone who is kind of engaging, like Larry's team, for instance, with the person who's unhoused in an encampment, like it's all about like what's that relationship's starting point? Is it like I really want to just listen to you, find out what you need, but with the honest statement that this is not going to be where you're going to stay in the long run. That's not going to happen. So how can we do this so that we make it work the best? And I think, I don't want to minimize all the other potential trauma, but I think one of the key that I'll highlight is how can we do it in a way, if people are moving, that they keep their stuff right with them through that whole process.
That's so important. We hear that over and over again.
I think perhaps it's important to point out that currently the county of Santa Cruz, the county government, does not operate a shelter. Watsonville does not operate a shelter. Capitola does not operate a shelter. Scotts Valley does not operate a shelter. We have in the city of Santa Cruz our partners at Housing Matters, 1220 River Street, the Overlook Campground, the Armory Camp, the Vehicle Safe Parking Program. But we can't be the only one doing this. If this is going to be a countywide effort, then the rest of the folks need to jump in and do their part. I get it. There's a fear that, oh my goodness, if you build it, they will come. I get that issue. But it is not the city of Santa Cruz's responsibility to take on the entire burden that comes with everything associated with folks experiencing homelessness. Our county partners are terrific on the health and human service stuff, terrific on that. But on the brick and mortar side of things, building shelter, committing funds to that, that's why I'll talk about it later. I think it's so important to have an affordable housing funding measure next year in the city of Santa Cruz that goes to affordable housing, transitions, navigation centers, and permanent supportive housing. To sit here and take what we've got now and the resources available now and the state's shifting ideas on what they want to do and not do, and a bunch of players sitting on the sideline, does not allow the city of Santa Cruz, it places us in an untenable position going forward. And so I think that we have been, in my view, quite responsible, where when Boise was in place, we didn't change our strategy. When the Supreme Court changes its rules, we don't change our strategy. When the governor decides to have a press conference and say that they're going to be doing away with encampment on state property and goes down to LA and picks up a broom and does a press conference, my point is, put down the broom, pick up a pen, send us some goddamn money, and let us do the rest of our job here.
Yeah, I guess I'll add as, I guess the wonk or subject matter expert for a moment. Just in terms of best practices, the U.S. Interagency Council on Homelessness back in April released a working report, a best practices guide called 19 strategies for communities to address encampments humanely and effectively. So it's kind of, those are the elements that you would look to do this kind of work in the most humane and respectful way. And so, just an example, before that they had the 6 principles, it was 2 years ago, and now they have 19. I think the value of that though is really kind of the specificity. I mean, I think most of everything in the 19 was really encapsulated in the 6. I think it just gave it some specificity that is really more actionable and implementable as a result. So it's really good guidance. And it begins, I think what Don was talking about at the front end, what I was sharing about our outreach team, is that this is a longer process. It's not about just going on a specific day and moving people and cleaning up the area. It begins and is rooted in equity, and it's about empowering the people that are on the ground, engaging folks, the outreach workers, housing navigators, connectors, health and human service workers, but really putting that kind of team together that's experienced in working with people and beginning to engage them and have those conversations, prepare them for what's going to happen downstream with the camp closing, and beginning to develop plans and making tangible efforts to connect them to those resources, right? So that's a piece that requires listening to the people, the people with lived experience who know what they need, know what their experience is, and know what's going to help them be successful. Having those health and human service workers, outreach workers that are leading the work and making the decisions on how to move forward. Collaborating with those variety of partners. It can't happen in isolation. We've got to pull together those different expertises. And so it's really a cross-system, multi-sector approach to doing this work. Making sure that you're attending to the basic needs. When people need health care, that you've got health care resources, you can begin to do that. I mean, when we've done some of these encampment resolutions, closing encampments, we've engaged HBHP to come out in the field in advance and do that kind of direct healthcare work. Sorry, thank you. Homeless Persons Health Project. It's a county clinic that serves specifically the homeless population, and a clinic based on Pearl Street. But that's an example of a specific resource. So not just our outreach workers, bringing healthcare services, behavioral health workers, and again, housing connectors, people that can play a role in connecting people to support in services that they need. So that's critical. The huge component is really about a destination. What are the shelter options and availability and capacity? What are the interim housing options? What are the permanent housing options that are available? So the best and most effective way to do it is to actually have those resources so people have another viable, better option in this process. Again, you were saying, Collin, that's not the end of the journey either. Getting somebody into interim housing shelter is the beginning of really stabilizing them and getting them into housing permanently. So those are all the required elements in this work, and part of that too is you can look up the 19 principles, and then connecting it to the broader system. And so, doing this work in a way when you have capacity for people to move into shelter and housing. Not that everybody is ready to do that at that moment in time. That's one of the challenges. What we've seen over the last 2 years is approximately 30 to 50% of the individuals in an encampment that we are working to close actually are at the point where they're willing to accept shelter. Now, one of the big caveats too is the shelter that you have available may not be the best fit for them. And this is why the mayor was talking about the need for shelter We need more and different kinds of shelter that are the kinds of places that are going to work for different people. We all like choice, right? And so somebody who's experiencing homelessness is no different. And so the more options that you have available, the more likely to be successful to help move people through that journey. So that's the systemic piece, is trying to make sure that we can develop the kind of capacity we need as a community to have places for people to go on an interim basis or an emergency basis, and at the same time also building the permanent solutions with respect to housing. And this is a deeply unaffordable community, and we cannot build enough fast enough to get out of this overnight. And then the flip side is, we're talking about systemic factors, and this is a little bit beyond the best practices of Encampment Resolution, but prevention upstream. It is so much more effective, less traumatic, more successful. Let's keep people from falling into homelessness immediately.
I want to add a couple of quick points on this. One is, be very careful when any level of government push back on the idea that you're going to now spend money that you spend on something else for upstream prevention. I want just to caution people on that. The state is now falling in love with that. You can measure how many shelter beds. You can measure how many people go through a NAV center. You can measure how many people got permanent supportive housing. You cannot measure who didn't fall into homelessness. Be very careful about that.
Heather, did you want to add anything?
First I want to say I'm learning so much tonight. I am not an expert on homelessness. I'm not an expert on policy, and this panel really are. And so I appreciate that. And with all humility, I just want to make a couple of points. First, I really want to push, not back or pull back or something, but just recenter ourselves in the reality that we have to, when we go into an encampment or talk about an encampment, realize that we are talking about human beings, right? Just to constantly be people-centered, and I know that the folks on this panel are, but it's so easy to start sort of talking at this high level and lose sight of what's actually happening on the ground. And I think a great way for us to stay connected is to talk to the folks who are there or who have been there, right? The people with the lived expertise to educate us about what we don't know, about what it feels like to have an encampment, removed really, sort of just wiped away, often by a bulldozer, and we need to be really real about that. The other thing I want to say is that the funding and the policy around housing is so complicated. I am not an expert. I'm the public defender, and I'm probably going to get in so much trouble from the county people who are experts, because I'm going to get this all wrong. But I do know that in conversations I've had with folks, and I am on the Housing for Health Partnership Policy Board, that the county is really focusing on permanent supportive housing because of this really real idea that shelter solves the sleeping problem but not the homelessness problem, right? Moving people from shelter to shelter and telling them they have to be gone during the day and there's a curfew and you can't bring your dog and you can't use the substances that you're addicted to, that if you stop them you literally will die, and it's miles away. There's so many things going on with shelter, and it's wonderful that we have shelter. But the real solution is to get people on a path to permanent supportive housing. And so with limited resources and dollars, the county has focused on those types of programs. I have a bullet list of all of the different things that we're doing, and I would bore you to death, and so I'm not going to do it. But I will say that last year, I'm proud to say that through county's efforts, we have 911 people who now have permanent housing. And that's something to applaud. It's not enough, right? We need to exponentially grow that number. It's not enough. And then the other thing I just want to talk about is eviction defense, because it's really close to my heart. If you look at our most recent point in time count, 29% of the folks who found themselves homeless are there because they were evicted. And we know from programs that we see, for example, in San Francisco, that just by providing attorneys during the eviction process, we can bring eviction rates down to almost 0.
Wow.
Which means we can take a huge bite out of homelessness by just keeping people in their homes. So a big plug for this sort of common sense.
Collin, do you want to add anything to this conversation?
Well, you know, I like a lot of what I heard, you know, great co-panelists. You know, and I kind of want to touch on like what Larry said, the basic need. Like that's like always where I come back to is the basic need of what someone, an individual needs. And like we discussed sleep, of course. So when people are coming to these camps, what is being offered? What is being provided? Are there shelter options? And like was touched on too, there are very few shelters available in our community. I remember I once worked at the Salvation in Watsonville, and when that closed, I was just like, what are people in that area gonna do? And there wasn't really a response to that. It was kind of, you know, and I really admire all the outreach workers out there. I think Watsonville does not get as enough support as they deserve, should have. So yeah, shelter, like what's being offered. So let's come up with a plan. You know, and I think I have to touch on this communication, right? As human beings, I enjoy communication when someone's clear and transparent to me. So, you know, we were touching on notices for encampments. You know, again, I've done outreach in Santa Cruz, I've done outreach in Watsonville, and notices of clearance of encampments have not necessarily been that clear.
Yes.
You know? And so that's something to improve on, I feel. You know, and then like all these services, health services, HPHP, I love HPHP, they make themselves very accessible, but that's a key thing, accessibility. We can say there's a resource, but how accessible is it? Is it location? Is it processes? Like the hula hoops or whatever you want to call it, the loops or whatever you want to call it. People have to go through to sometimes get a service. I'm good with it. Like they sometimes get discouraged and don't even want to carry through the process. Even as an advocate and a support, like come on, we can do this. We can I'm gonna walk along with you. You know, still it can be discouraging just going through those processes. You know, and then yeah, just the basic need, right, and the communication and what is being offered. And then like people's belongings, like was mentioned too, like that's not really clear either. Like where are people's belongings? Like where are they now? And that also just really it damages the trust, right? The trust in just their own community, you know, trust in their service provider if they have a service provider, so yeah, like that's what's really coming to mind when I think about it, and something else, but it's lost. But yeah, so it's a really, it's a sad thing. Like I've been like that's the only word I can use is sad, because you know you see just the displacement, how it impacts people. Again, just being part of, like I remember the bench lands, I remember going through there previous to the rollout. Especially I used to work with K-age youth, and it was just trying to connect with someone down there, and just the vulnerability and the trauma you just know just from just that population alone. But to be part of this encampment, and then to not, just to see him go through it, just to see a human being just going through it, you know, it's a challenge, and I think it's something that, again, is brought up to collaborative. Collaboration is key. Like I always say, it's always key. Not one service provider can provide all of one human being's need. So I think it's really as programs working together to do it. It's unfortunate how a lot of programs aren't even necessarily aware of each other a lot of times. So I think that could be improved on, you know. Yeah.
And also, I mean, I think what I hear a through line is really we need to come together as a community, you know, top down, bottom up, all around, you know, organizations and local agencies.
I
Yes,
jump back
please.
in? There were two things that came up for me, and one was something when Heather recounted her story earlier about being stopped. It reminded me that another thing that would be a great goal in Encampment Resolution is for there never to be a law enforcement officer as part of that process.
Yes.
And what I want to say about that though is I want to be really careful. It's not to say that like the police are going to be evil. It's that people who've been on the street for a long time, that's their orientation, is the police are not my friend. They are going to make trouble for me in some way. That's almost always the kind of underlying experience. So if that's not part of the encampment clearing and resolution, that seems really valuable. The other piece I want to mention, it's been talked about, but I want to push it even a little further about, yeah, we need more shelter, et cetera, so that when people are moved, there's somewhere to go. But I think we have to expand our willingness as a community to think about what kind of places we are willing to have people go that aren't necessarily structured shelters, because there, first of all, we'll never have enough of that, and they will always be intimidating to some people who are, have had a lot of experience in structured shelters as they've experienced homelessness, and like, I'm not going there again. And we need to be able to say, when the outreach worker's there, we need to say, this is a place you can go that I think will work for you, not just here's one shelter that we could get you into.
Great. I just want to pivot a little bit. So in June, the Supreme Court walked back Martin v. Boise with the Grants Pass v. Johnson ruling. So now, according to the court, it's constitutional to criminalize someone for sleeping outside, even if there is no shelter available. Like in our community, we've talked about already tonight how few shelter beds there are and how many people are experiencing homelessness and that disparity. So I guess, Heather, I'm going to start with you. What does this mean for individuals experiencing homelessness in our community, and maybe even a little broader if you want to speak to that?
Sure. I mean, first of all, the ruling is troubling. The Supreme Court said that it was not criminalizing the status of being poor or homeless. You can exist, you just can't sleep. You can't close your eyes, you can't have your eyes fluttering in REM, you can't have a blanket, but you're welcome to exist in the state of permanent wakefulness wherever you would like, which is absurd and inhumane. The good news is that we as a community don't have to do something just because one of the most conservative Supreme Courts we've ever had says we can. We can choose compassionate, courageous, community-oriented approaches together with my partners at the city. These are good people who care so much about this community, with our CBO partners, with all of us together here. We can find solutions that will work for Santa Cruz, right? That will work for the individual people that we serve and we see. I think that this opinion is going to be incredibly regressive in communities across the country. We already see just the heavy-handed rule of law falling on folks who have the audacity to close their eyes and try to catch some sleep on the street, which is where they live, because they have nowhere else to go. And I really, truly believe that in Santa Cruz we're not going to fall prey to that. I think it's really easy when you have constituents and people, standing up in city council meetings or at board of supervisors meeting. They're angry about feces on the street. They're angry about needles. They're angry about tents. They're angry about folks who are suffering from mental health and substance use disorders. They want their streets, air quotes, cleaned up. And I think it's really easy to look at a decision like this and say, we can just arrest them all and hand them over to the county jail. It looks like you're doing something. What you are actually doing thank you, is spending a ton of money. It is the most expensive way to deal with our housing crisis, is to put people in jail and to criminalize homelessness. It is also traumatizing and inhumane, and it is never what this community has stood for. So we all need to be brave. We need to be courageous. We need to fight fear with facts. We need to work together, all of us, from leadership on down and back up and all around, as you said, Mayor, to solve these problems together.
Anybody want to add to that?
Well, I'll jump in on a part of what Andrew said. There's nothing with which I disagree. You know, when Mayor started this, and there was a little bit of what Heather just said, sort of, you know, try to view this issue. We all bring to this issue our history, our experience, our whatever. So I'm going to share something, and Joy Schendeldecker is here. When she and I were both running for mayor, we talked about this issue from time to time in public forums. And one of the things that I mentioned then, and I want to mention it now, when I was running for mayor, when I was knocking on doors throughout the city, I would say, hi, my name's Fred Keeley, I'd love to be your mayor, what's on your mind? Way over 90%, way over 90% of folks instantaneously said, housing affordability and homelessness. Now, I think that's where the agreement ends. There's not 100% agreement on what people meant by that, so as they continued to talk, you could start seeing the divergence, various points of view. One of them would be well, since we're talking homelessness, we'll stay with that for a moment. So some people would say what the public defender said, Jim, I'm tired of this on the street, I'm tired of this downtown, I'm tired of this, you gotta clean this up, you gotta take care of it. For other people, it's much more about the nature of this conversation that's going on in here, which is, what is the compassionate, intelligent, effective response? Let's go do that. What I know, holding 4 different elective offices over 40 years in this community, is that if what you want to do is actually get the voters to engage in something, let's say, to adopt an affordable housing and smart response to homelessness measure, you better do that in the context of those feelings and thoughts and opinions that people have. Because if what you do is you go into it and say, we're going with this particular way to deal with it, some people are going to say, that's not what I had in mind. So I think a rich, thorough conversation, Don's engaged in this, Housing Matters is, Housing Santa Cruz County is, lots of folks are engaged in this conversation right now about what should that look like. What is an appropriate ballot measure with regard to housing affordability and those pieces of the homeless challenge that we can do in the city of Santa Cruz. So what I'm saying here is, I admire what Mayor said earlier about opening your mind to other people's views of this. Because I do think way over 90% of the people in the city of Santa Cruz want, quote, something done about homelessness, and that is where the agreement ends. How we can fashion a broader agreement on that is what I think the community is engaged in both tonight and in other formal and informal venues.
Can I add?
Please.
I think, you know, so bring it back to kind of, is it a new world with grants pass and no longer being cruel and unusual punishment to criminalize people who are citizens of this business. And I think kind of for me, the key takeaway, I mean, so the city has not changed its approach in light of that, because I think fundamentally, we've been talking about it, is that strategies that are compassionate and humane are more effective, right? So moving towards criminalization, you're not going to force your way out of this. You're not going to jail people out of this problem. And so The good news is humane and compassionate approaches are going to be what's most effective in working to reduce and hopefully ultimately solve homelessness. So it's all in alignment.
Did you want to say something?
Yeah, I did. I can't resist. I brought a little thing with me that was very relevant about that recent Supreme Court decision, because I had a chance, I've looked at it a few times. It's kind of a big deal in our world. And, as we were talking about, the earlier decision, the Boise decision, said you could not punish people for their status, in other words. But then in the new Supreme Court decision, they said that sleeping in a public place is not a status, because even though they said that even though that activity is inseparable from the status of being unhoused. But ironically, I want to read you a sentence from their decision that I thought was just ironically beautiful. They said, in overturning the Boise thing, the Boise decision was issued by federal courts removed from realities on the ground. And I thought, no, you guys are removed from the realities of human beings who sleep on the ground.
It was the people on the ground who brought that case in the first goddamn place.
Would you, I just want to talk for a minute, if you wouldn't mind sharing a little bit about Governor Newsom, recent executive order for California cities regarding homelessness response. Can you walk us through that a little bit?
And it really has two parts, and I think it was somewhat misunderstood in terms of how it impacts local communities. But because there were two pieces. One is on state land, what he said, that is very impactful. That will cause an increased criminalization, increased enforcement along highways, especially, is probably the main place we would see that, but other places as well. But the other thing is he was trying to put pressure on cities and counties to follow this lead, and it's kind of, Fred can address whether it's an implied threat or an explicit threat, but the threat essentially was, if you don't deal with encampments in a similarly strong way, maybe you won't be getting as much state money for whatever, for housing or homelessness response. So those are the things, and I do want to say also, it doesn't say, I don't want to soften it too much, but it's not like Newsom just said, just go in and arrest everybody who's sleeping under overpasses that are state highways. He did encourage a more balanced approach, but the reality is, I think, it's going to be still aggressive, and that, I think we just have to acknowledge that.
And Keeley, did you want to give a little bit more about the cities?
Oh, sure. To paraphrase Kamala Harris, he's lost his damn mind. I'm sorry. Because Joe Biden would say, I'm serious. I'm sure.
And then we can start asking questions.
I'll let you know when we start the Q&A section.
I think we have a lot of questions.
Yeah, just we're aware. Thank you.
I don't pretend to know truly what the governor is doing. His journey in this subject matter is perplexing to me. I think he started correctly, then invested money, and now I imagine he wants to launch some national something or other at some point. Yes. This is not exactly a feather in his cap from his point of view. And so now it's, we're going to stop funding failure, that's a direct quote, without distinguishing between those that he considers successful and those that are failing. Governor says we're going to be doing this on state property. Thank you very much. Did you also associate that with an increased appropriation in the state budget for shelter for those people that you're moving out of there?
Yeah.
This is the worst kind of policy by press release. I'm sorry, Governor, that you couldn't get what you wanted out of this in 5.5 years. I'm very unhappy with the way the governor has pivoted on this issue, when what he could have done is actually make measurable, serious progress by saying that $24 billion was a down payment. You know, he's kvetching that he spent $24 billion and he's going to stop funding failure. What an extraordinary thing to say. What an extraordinary thing to say. So I am, as you might imagine, not happy with the governor on this point. I think he ought to return to his roots, which were compassionate and intelligent and spending money. And if you are going to say, we're going to stop funding failure,
Stop funding the jail.
that if you're going to stop funding failure in the housing, in the homeless space, how about funding success then? How do you measure that? I'm going to assume if you reduce, now we're going to get a debate here about about whether this is good, bad, or indifferent. But street homelessness in Santa Cruz is down 36% in 18 months. Now, I don't know if you're the government, and we're housing people, sheltering people, providing services to people. The only one in the county doing that. I don't know how you can measure success and not say that looks like success. But instead, the governor apparently is deciding that local governments have failed. So he's going to cut off funding and tell people we the state are going to engage in their activity, which doesn't do a damn thing when somebody is moved out of there. I used to have a colleague in the legislature named Deborah Bowen, and somebody would go on about a very complicated issue and how they had a solution to it, and they went all the way through it. And at the end, she'd pause and say, and then what? And I say to the governor, and then what?
Can I ask a question?
Just a moment, please.
I'm
Just
fired
a
up, man. Y'all need to
I
quit talking and let the
understand.
audience talk. We got questions, yeah, man. We fired up, man. Y'all ain't talking this. Is this a good? Is this good cop, bad cop? Is this good cop, bad cop? Cause y'all bouncing this stuff around. You talk to each other every day. We need to talk to you and tell you what we going on. I'm homeless. I'm homeless and I need help. I ain't even here to hear all what the government talking about.
Yeah.
I need a place to stay.
Right on, Curtis.
Yeah.
We're going to wrap up the panel part of our discussion with our question we ask every Neighbors for Neighbors, which is to ask the panelists to share with our audience what community members can do to help. So, Dawn, would you like to start?
Sure. Yeah, what I think is really just to be two things, I think. One, to support and encourage others to support having services, housing, whatever, near them. This is the plague of this issue, as far as I'm concerned, is, like Fred said, lots of people will say, yes, I want to do something about this, but then the next thing they say is, but don't do it very close to me. And that's, we can't get anywhere if that's what we do. And then the other thing is really just to, in any instance where you hear a person who you're engaged with in some way say something really inhumane about homelessness and people experiencing homelessness, to speak up. Say something about that.
Mayor Keeley, what can community members do?
We can have conversations with the
Community. When you say what can the community members do, then I'm assuming that question is very broad about
It is.
the community.
Yes.
Like why is housing
Not
matters removed
necessarily-
for college shelters?
Just a moment, please.
I think the community can get and remain involved, which they are, in making their voice heard on what they see. The problem definition is almost always the easiest part of the problem. The solution part of the conversation is the most difficult.
That's why we want to talk.
You guys are just making the shit go slower when you
You're
keep
just
interrupting.
taking up all the time.
We still got a half an hour and questions are about to begin in a few moments.
It's like 7:30 right now. That's a half an hour, right? We got a half an hour. Should we start asking questions? That's not very long for questions.
You're talking about voting. How many people here want to say something? Vote on that. How many people got something to say in the audience?
Larry, do you want
I think, for me, it's two things. I think exactly what Don said is that as we try to develop solutions and services, the question and the hardest part of the problem is the where, followed by the funding. And I think, but fundamentally, the other piece, it's a related kind of not in my backyard issue, is we need a lot more housing. And where is that going to go? And what is the density associated with it? And that's a difficult community conversation that we have to get through if we're going to solve homelessness.
Thank you. Heather?
As a house person, I want to model what I think we should do by ceding my time to Mr. Curtis.
Hey,
Yes, thank you.
my name Curtis Rutherford, 831-246-4240. 831-246-4240. I'm standing up here asking for help because I'm homeless. You say sleeping out there, you don't give citations, but you sure run them off. The people down there run you off. Yeah, I'm waking up traumatized. I'm waking up traumatized. And I might go off and go back to jail. I don't want to go to jail. I've got 38 years clean and sober, y'all. I'm not going backwards. I'm going forward. And I'm down there on the streets giving homeless people stuff. I'm working it. You may not, man, this is good cop, bad cop stuff here. These people got something to say, and there's a lot of people in here I have saw walk they talk, and they out there. So I need help. 831-246-4240. I'm not angry, I'm just passionate about the people around me and what I'm going through. Thank you. Thank you.
I would like to ask Mr. Imwalle, who in your department?
She ceded her time to Curtis. Caleb hasn't checked out. Please follow the format, stop interrupting, then we can talk.
Are you paid by the group?
Yeah.
We'll talk later. We'll talk later?
Yeah.
The people are here now.
I mean, me and you.
We can always get
You're right.
Just one moment, we're very close. Collin has the last.
It's good.
Thank you. We'll start questions. I'm going to remind everybody, there's 1 minute. You have 1 minute to ask your question or make a statement. And it sounds like Laura is going first.
Thank you.
And then Marlena will be queuing up the questions afterwards.
Okay, I have a pretty simple question. I'd like to know who in Mr. Imwalle's department orders the sweeps, the raids, the police raids. And I'd like to know, in light of what all you guys said, who has been ordering the raids, continual raids, all summer long? That's all I have to ask.
Good question.
So the decision on which encampment is closed at which time is based off a number of factors related to public safety, public health concerns, environmental concerns, and that decision is made collectively across city departments at the executive level to determine which encampments get closed.
So all of you are guilty of all those sweeps and stealing all that property all summer long? So the whole, what you just said was the whole city, all the departments are responsible for deciding to steal those poor people's survival equipment all summer long. Just
Silence.
Yeah, nobody knows about the 90-day storage loss. Let's just be clear about that.
Excuse me, Marlena's going to start the queue.
So if you want to raise your hand if you're interested in questions, I know we have lots of folks interested to ask questions. We'll start Kevin, Darius, and Suzanne, and then I'm going to go to the other side of the room. Joy, David, and Robert, I believe. And we'll each have 1 minute for your question. And I'll be timing if you have a question about we have Kevin, Darius, and Suzanne first.
I've
Kevin,
actually got 2 questions. If I can fit them in half a minute, I can ask them.
you have 1 minute.
Okay, cool. The first question, I think, goes to Larry, and it has to do with sweeps. Outreach workers are great, but we also need DMV liaisons who, when encampments are swept, police can write fix-it tickets, maybe, to people with unregistered vehicles, and the DMV liaisons work with them and the DMV to register those vehicles so they aren't impounded, which equates to stolen. Because once they're impounded, they can't go. My other question was, why does Housing Matters claim to have 3 emergency shelters? To my way of thinking, it has none. A true emergency shelter, in my mind, is where someone can get a bed for the night the same day, for example, when he has come home from work to find the lock on his apartment door has changed and all of his belongings have been piled out like a curb. Where does he go? That person needs to go to an emergency shelter. And to my mind, Housing Matters cannot accommodate that. I guess that's wrong.
Well, I'm not sure I'm really, as a board member and not a staff operator.
Right, I guess.
But I'm happy to give you my perspective, and that is that Housing Matters, for instance, what's called, you know this, but just for others, the loft shelter would be an emergency shelter in the way that you're talking about if there weren't so many people who were already in that or in the queue to move in there. So, if there's not enough shelter, there's not enough emergency shelter. I guess that's my point, is that you until you have a real large amount of shelter throughout the community and lots of options, all the shelters will be full, and that hypothetical person you just described is not going to be able to get down to a shelter and get in that night.
Because of the queue that fronts the loft, that can't be an emergency shelter. You can join the queue and maybe you can get in a week or 2 weeks.
Right.
But that doesn't none of the shelters would have.
So is the issue more just like what it's called? Like the shelter's okay, but the word emergency should be taken out of it?
Emergency is problematic.
Okay.
Thank you. Thanks.
Just run them out the street.
Okay, so next up I have Darius.
Why are there encampments? And what I mean by that is, we have police working 24/7. They know all the hot spots for encampments, Pogo Nips, Harvey West, San Lorenzo Park. Why aren't they simply, when there's 2 or 3 tents or people get together, it's like, hey, you guys got a choice. Go to the Armory for $12.20 or whatever's available, or move down the road.
It's not available.
Because
There's nothing available.
once they start this, they get past the tipping point with the encampment, you end up with a $144,000 bill to clean up Pogo Nip. Imagine that $144K went to rental assistance, went to maybe boosting the shelter capacity. There should be no reason for an encampment to even be created, City of Santa Cruz, anywhere. That's what, and I think I speak for a lot of house folks and Buckingham House as well.
That's quite a stretch. That's it. Suzanne?
Let's let somebody on the panel answer the question. Does anybody want to take
Yeah,
that?
I guess my response to that is that's symptomatic of this broader systemic problem, is that people have to go somewhere, right? And as we've talked about in a number of different ways tonight, we don't have enough affordable housing, we don't have enough shelter capacity, so there is no place else for people to go. So the idea that encampments can be reduced to 0 in this community, for putting aside even the compassion, humanity, all those other important elements of this, it's just structurally there has to be a place for people to go. And until we're committed to having enough permanent supportive housing to create a place, or shelter, and then the supportive services to move people to permanent housing, this is going to be a challenge, not just in Santa Cruz, not just in California, but this country.
Dawn, did you want to?
Yeah, I will say a tiny bit, but I want to encourage folks with lived experience to answer this more, and which is that there's, just like everyone else, Darius, people want safety and community. Mm-hmm. And so creating an encampment creates a little community connection with the people around you, and it creates a safer place to be than if you're off by yourself. And, you know, to just disperse people and not recognize those human needs would be even more inhumane than some of the things that are already happening.
So I want to thank everyone on the panel. I can feel your hearts and everyone in the room. In the 1 minute I have, I just want to address from my heart maybe a slightly different perspective. However we're working with this situation, to give a 30-day notice and have 1 day for people who are already so marginalized. Being homeless is one of the most exhausting jobs on the planet. So much walking, carrying things, and someone could be having the beginning of a cold, or someone could have lost a parent, or lost their wallet, or lost their phone, or just be exhausted. And so I think the whole thing of saying we're going to get, and I so appreciate this is a difficult situation, but one thing that I want to add to the conversation is that rather than having a 1 day when the whole encampment, by the statistics even quoted, only 30 to 50%, so half the people, I can't call it encampment resolution, I have to call it encampment teardown. And if any, okay, so that's my time, I feel passionate, I'm not attacking you, it's a very difficult situation, but that's one of the places to say, how can we be humane? How can we pour energy and finances to make the encampments better, which would make the neighbors happier, and there could be volunteers. There's ways to do it, but right now it's inhumane. It would be an act of war if someone from another country came into any of your homes and did what are being doing to people who are already marginalized. Thank you.
Very good.
Thank you.
Our next question is Joy.
Okay, so I want to address just the premise of criminalization a little bit, because I think, with all due respect, Larry and Mayor Keeley, I don't think you fully understand what criminalization is, and I think the introduction even was a little limited. So I prepared this earlier, and I made some extra copies, not for everybody, but just if you want to pass it down. Just some little notes on what criminalization is in like the expanded sense that Heather was indicating. And this actually is model legislation from Gloria Johnson Grants Pass, which is what I would like to see our city do instead of the camping standards and services and oversized vehicle ordinances, something that's positive and not negative, because those ordinances are by nature criminalizing. The whole conversation is framed in a punitive carrot and a stick way. Carrot and a stick has been used repeatedly in council meetings and reports. So I will wrap it up. So I think we just, I would like for you to read those and to engage with me and the community about what criminalization really is. It is not only giving somebody a ticket or only putting somebody in jail. And until we're having that conversation, then we're speaking on like whole different languages.
Right on.
Okay, so I have more. I will sit down. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Joy. I look forward to reading this, and I couldn't agree more with that based on my experience serving folks who are suffering from homelessness and struggling with poverty and with mental health and substance use disorders. We are all human beings, y'all. Every single one of us at core, that's what we are. And until we stop dehumanizing, stop stigmatizing, stop labeling, stop talking about people like they're a defendant or a body or a number or a statistic, we are not going to solve these problems. And so thank you for this information. I look forward to it. Thank you.
Yeah, all right.
Just a comment, because I also want to just appreciate both Heather and Joy broadening, that perspective. I did want to say a little bit in our defense. I mean, we are responding to a great extent to the way the panel was framed today, and so we've kind of focused on certain parts. But I agree, and I want to. There's a really fine book that I use in the class I teach on homelessness at UCSC, and it's called Banish, and it's really covers in a much broader way the array of tools communities use to move people around and create penalties mainly for being on the street in some way. So I do want to appreciate that it is a broader topic.
Yeah. And Joy, thank you for saying that, and also what we're doing here obviously is a drop in the bucket, and I think we all acknowledge that. Neighbors for Neighbors, the idea behind it is really to have these conversations in an ongoing basis. We have this meeting every month. So we cover different topics, and I mean, over the course of a year and a half, almost 2 years, I think we're barely scratching the surface of what the experience of homelessness is, what the solutions are, and all of that. So yes, I agree with you. This is just scratching the surface, barely.
Can I also just add really quickly, if anybody wanted to access the document and doesn't have a paper one, it's on my link tree on my Instagram, just Joy for Santa Cruz, or you can look me up, call me, text me, whatever.
Marlena, who is next? David.
Hi, my name is David Cameron. I'm 38, was born and raised in Santa Cruz County. I've been on the streets or institutions for the last 20 years. Last week I spoke with my county coordinator to someone in this room that works at HSC and was basically told I do not qualify and will not qualify. I don't agree with the statement that most people in the streets of Santa Cruz were housed here. Thank you to the panel, especially Heather Rogers and the mayor. I liked watching your facial expressions as people said things. I know you guys have compassion. I know this is a bureaucratic nightmare, and there are many hoops to jump through, and it's incredibly frustrating. A couple real quick questions is is it possible to see HSC's budget? Okay? I literally want to know where the money is spent. What is spent on salaries, and it's crazy to me how much money is spent for people that have jobs to be housed when, there are people, I would volunteer to do this stuff and not get paid just for a pallet house, okay? Why are there no more AB 109 beds? Why did the River Street shelter get closed and red tagged? And why is the armory supposedly closed? Whoa. Those are all questions that I don't even expect answers, just please think about it. And there's my minute. Great, awesome, thank you. Oh, and one more thing, I think Newsom wants to clean up the state so he can run for president eventually. And I think that CDCR's failure in medical care and the takeover by the federal government is basically what will happen if the state starts to run stuff at a state level, not a community level.
Thanks for your feedback, David.
How are we doing with the person on our queue? Gentleman in the back with the Career College t-shirt. You're here now.
For you who don't know me, I have a name, go by the brand Grandfather.
Grandfather?
And I'm a vet. And I bet you Don, Mayor, Larry, I remember when you came from Salinas, a new friend, and Collin, let's just talk possibility. What we've got to do is come together at that town clock and get soup, hot water. They don't get any food until noon. So those of you who don't know me, I'm full-time at 88 years young. And if you see this Cabrillo, see what you can bring to the campus where they had less, come on Mayor, less than 100 people bothered to vote for the Democratic student president, the trustee. But I know this mayor in 5 years, he knows my name now. And all I can say is, let's keep this conversation going. The question to the panel, particularly Don, what's the next step to keep this possibility of what you started, I can't tell you how many years ago? I appreciate you. So,
Thank you.
1 minute, huh?
Yes, you're good.
So you can't do it in a minute, you can't do it in 3. But what we can do is come back next week, next month, in the same place in this library. Thank you.
Thank you. Next one or two is Tony, and then Clarabelle, and then in the back.
This is a question for Mayor Keeley. Thank you everybody for this panel. It's wonderful. I'm a Santa Cruz resident, and I've been hearing for years about how Capitola, Watsonville, Scotts Valley is going to step up. And I thought there was some progress there, and now I'm hearing there's not real progress. So what gives, and how can we get that to work?
Well, how to get it to work. I'm assuming that what you may mean by that is how do they get engaged in either having some shelter in their community, doing whatever.
Exactly.
I'm not in the habit of telling I'm in the habit of telling the governor what I think they should do. I'm not in the habit of telling other city councils and mayors what they should do, but they are small. 2 of them are quite small, and I understand that. However, having said that, there are small communities in California that do something. And I think that in the same way that you're having this, in city of Capitola, everybody's coming here, and what we're talking about is the city of Santa Cruz. Maybe you want to invite the mayor of Capitola, the mayor of Scotts Valley, the mayor of Watsonville, and do this with them.
Yes.
And see what they're going to do.
Can we do that?
Sure.
Who would organize it?
No.
You?
That's why mayor's here.
That's what we do.
Let's do that. Get it going.
That's a great
And I will
idea.
say, let me just say one other thing. As you know, you heard what I just said. I didn't say the county of Santa Cruz, and the reason for that is they are our partner. The level of work being done by the county of Santa Cruz is spectacular in the health and human service field. You can walk around City Hall all day and you'll never find a Department of Health and Human Services. That's not what cities do. So the degree to which we are able to make things work and go forward, it's in large part because we have a county partner.
Thank you.
Thank you.
One last question. I think this is going to be a...
Hi, I'm Clarabelle. I'm a case manager at Housing Matters, so I'm working on the ground with people experiencing homelessness every day. Housing Matters isn't just a shelter, but it's also a resource center, a place where people can take a shower, wash their clothes, check their mail, take care of health issues, otherwise basic essential needs for existing. And if everything someone owns is on their back, is in their tent, is on the street, it's no wonder that they want that tent to be close to those resources for existing. So I'm feeling a little bit of a disconnect between what is being said and what is being experienced on the street, and I'm obviously addressing the sweeps on Coral Street. So my question to you, Larry, is how many of those 19 best practices that you mentioned are being implemented during those sweeps? Can you name them? And is there any plan or discussion within the city of how they're going to be implementing more of those best practices? Because I'm not really seeing them being there every day, working with these people and having those conversations. And thank you for your time.
So I don't have the list open, but I'll name off a few. So first, if you're out there doing that work, you obviously have seen our outreach team out there on numerous occasions, weeks in advance of any coordinated closure action, correct? Mm-hmm. So that's a big piece. Collaboration, cross-sector partnership, collaboration is a big piece of that. Housing Matters is a partner right there outside the gates that is a participant in this work and has a role in this work. HPHP, Homeless Person Health Project, behavioral health. So all those resources have been out there working on that in advance of any specific closure date. So that covers, I think, 4 or 5 of those first 19 principles.
Okay.
You have more to say? I want to sort of address it from the Housing Matters perspective because, you know, I know you're aware of this, that within Housing Matters, how the sweep took place, how that all went down, has caused a lot of disturbance, discussion at Housing Matters.
Yeah, I had no idea that it was happening.
I lost my job.
No idea.
No, I mean, just now I'm talking about. You haven't heard, like, there've been staff meetings and those kinds of activities just in the last few
Now,
weeks.
yes,
Yeah, that's
but-
what I'm saying, that's all I'm saying. Let me just keep going with that. So, the reason I bring that up is that how this went down concerns, I think, is kind of pervasive in the organization now, and has led at the board, you know, I'm at the board level, we have really been making this commitment that we're going to work with the city to just keep improving. You know, Larry's got a really good set of goals, he has limited resources, and we have a lot, as you do, you personally have a lot to contribute to, like thinking this through. How could this be done better? And we're gonna do that.
I really like what you said about not having cops on the ground, and I hope to see that in the future because it's really upsetting.
Yeah.
Yep. Don't send officer carry anymore.
Clap until you see it.
I want to thank our panel. Thank you so much for being here and taking questions from Housing Matters and also from the community here. We appreciate all of you.
Congratulations on 5 times the turnout. And I hope it's about the stellar panel and not the free pizza.
Marlene is going to talk about what comes next.
Oh, it's just a way of like agreeing with what someone said.
Hold on 1 second, I got one quick announcement.
It's a little less disruptive.
Thanks everybody for being here tonight, we appreciate you. It means a lot to me to see this room so full of people who care about this issue and are committed to resolving homelessness with compassion. It really does move me, and I'm inspired by all of your passion here tonight, so thank you. I would like to invite you to join us at our next campus tour. It's September 24th, it's a Tuesday at 11 a.m. That same evening, we will be back here at the Capitola Library from 6 to 8 p.m. for our next Neighbors for Neighbors meetup. The topic will be permanent supportive housing. It's a very important topic and aligned with our mission at Housing Matters. So I'm excited to dive into it with all of you, and I hope to see every one of you in this room again, continuing these meaningful conversations. So thank you all.
Stop the sweep.
Stop the sweep. Stop the sweep.
Stop the sweep.
Stop the sweep.
Stop the sweep.
Stop the sweep.
Stop the sweep. Stop the sweep. Stop the sweep. Stop the sweep. Stop the sweep. Stop the sweep. Stop the sweep. Stop the sweep.